Let me ask Shalini ma'am. Shalini ma'am, are you there?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, good to go, Akshat and Shefali.
Thank you, ma'am. Shefali. Yeah, Shefali edition starting in a minute.
Will climate change soon feature on more patient charts?
Yes, you heard that right. It may prove costly to combat and adapt to climate change, as world records its first ever patient diagnosed with climate change.
Good evening to one and all present here. Geography Awareness Week is annually observed across the globe in the third week of November to encourage young and old citizens to think and learn about the significance of a place and how we affect and are affected by it.
On behalf of Ecosperity, the Environment Club of Shri Guru Gobind Singh College of Commerce, University of Delhi, we welcome all environment enthusiasts to this virtual commemoration of the Geography Awareness Week 2021 on the theme Understanding Climate Change from Different Perspectives, where we have with us proficient panelists from diverse pursuits sharing their outlook on the heated issue of the year.
Before moving ahead, let's introduce you to our college. Shri Guru Gobind Singh College of Commerce was established in 1984 as a prominent institution that has specialization in commerce, economics, and business studies for the past 37 years and is well known for its academic distinction and brilliance. Our college has been accredited A grade by NAC, and as per India Today's ranking, the college stood on 11th position this year. Our college is set out to provide a humanistic, holistic, and liberal learning environment for the students with the purpose of stimulating and developing their intellectual, emotional, and social potential. It has skillfully handled its environmental duties and has encouraged us to do so.
Immense support college provides to its initiatives like ours is another way of making a contribution towards the environment. A substantial number of green initiatives have been taken to create an environmental friendly ambience in the college. For instance, setting up a hybrid system of wind and solar panels, solar power lamppost, and rainwater harvesting storage tank. The installation of an e-waste collection bin, organic waste converter, and sanitary napkin incinerator has also been done by the college to ensure proper segregation and responsible recycling of the waste on the campus. The college also has a number of green spaces maintained around the campus, which not only adds to its beauty, but also fosters a connection between the students and nature.
Ecosperity is a step forward in demonstrating our love for the environment. It reflects our belief that doing something for the environment and doing well must go together. Following its motto, from attitude to action, we strive to bring a positive change in the environment through our thriving efforts. The members keep their spirits up and continue on the path to bring about change and are confident that a small step can add up to a significant benefit for the betterment of the society as a whole.
Before we begin with this panel discussion, I would like Dr. Neha Goyal, our convener, to extend her heartfelt greetings to our esteemed guest.
Yeah, sorry, I was unable to unmute myself. The motto of our college, Shri Guru Gobind Singh College of Commerce, is to behold all human race as one. And extending this percept of universal equality, we at Ecosperity believe in upholding the entire race of life on earth as one, which deserves to nurture and thrive in a harmonious coexistence of all the species under this umbrella of life on earth. While the Green Brigade of Ecosperity strives to live up to this vision with our own motto, from attitude to action, we try to amalgamate the vision laid by the home institution under the guidance of our principal, Sir, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, with our foundational goal of environmental conservation and pledge to protect all constituents of the nature. And to upkeep the spirit of sustainability, we are hosting today the panel discussion on understanding understanding climate change from different perspectives, thus commemorating the Geography Awareness Week for our students and the audience. Given that all species on Earth live in the overlapping spheres of ecological cycles of the biosphere, all life forms, along with the humans, share an intrinsic and intricate connection through this interlinked web of life. And this aspect of planetary existence is enough to validate the fact that how our anthropogenic activities derived out of selfish interests are causing irreparable damage to the ecosystems. There is no denying the fact that climate change is responsible for the shift in species range, increased risk from disasters, vulnerability of ecosystems and their services, the rising temperature and their effects. This underlines the need for developing prudence for the protection of varied species, which is pivotal to the human concern of creating a healthier and a prosperous planet. Well, the education system has always been proactive in identifying the problems that are contemporary in nature and finding solutions to them. In line to this thought, we thought to have varied perspectives from different stakeholders of the society to have a better understanding of the problem and find solutions to climate change. Transdisciplinary efforts in education, focusing on the local, regional, and global learning continuum, it offers new perspectives on managing various challenges posed to sustainability in the Anthropocene. And yes, we know that one of those challenges is climate change. And here we have great workers to share their perspective on climate change with us. I extend many thanks to you, Shalini ma'am, Rituraj sir, Dharam sir, Tanya ma'am, and Rashi ma'am for being here with us in spite of all your different commitments. And we are waiting to hear you. Well, over to you, Shefali and Akshit, without any further ado.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insightful and energizing words. We are overwhelmed to have you and our guests at this session today.
We are extremely delighted to welcome our renowned panelists for the day, Dr. Shalini Dhyani, Mr. Rituraj Fukan, Mr. Dharam Singh, Ms. Tanya Isser, and Ms. Rashi Sirohi. We thank all of you for taking out time and being here with us today. It is indeed a pleasure to have you with us.
Now, let's empty the stage for our panelists and begin this journey of enlightenment. Taken as a whole, the range of published evidence indicates that the net damage costs of climate change are likely to be significant and increase over time. We often think about human-induced climate change as something disastrous in the future, but it is an ongoing process.
I would take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Shalini Dhyani. She is currently working as a senior scientist at the CSIR, National Environmental Engineering Research Institute. She has been South Asia Regional Chair for IUCN, Commission on Ecosystems Management, and has recently been on IPBES, lead author Global Thematic Assessment on Sustainable Use of Wild Species. She has earned her doctorate in forest ecology and PG diploma in biodiversity conservation. She will be offering a scientist's perspective today to enlighten the young learners on understanding climate change. She is truly an inspiration for many of us on how to grow in life and continuously keep learning.
Now, we would request Shalini ma'am to embrace the young minds and share her valuable scientific insights on climate change, as well as her own experience of the Kedarnath floods, as she has closely witnessed the reality of losing life and property during the calamity, which seemed to have become the red alert for the planet.
Thank you so much, Shefali. And it is a privilege indeed to be part of this panel discussion and be the opening speaker for this session to give you some insights about how climate change in daily life is affecting us. It's much more than what we have been listening in daily print media, reading in print media, and also news channels. Glasgow COP has just ended. My experience are even more, with my age, in last 10 to 15 years, our family closely witnessed the incidences that we called as disaster and extreme climate events. And nicely narrated Neha also about living in harmony with the nature. This is something that we all, especially urban residents, have to learn if we actually want to understand that climate change is here. It's unprecedented and it might damage the way we are thinking, much more than that, what we are thinking. I know you all might be really bored with a lot of webinars every day. You all are working from home, studying from home in online classes. So I'll not burden you with a lot of statistics and jargons, but my idea is actually to make you aware about what's going on around with climate change, especially now it's no more climate change, but a lot of degradation, deforestation, biodiversity loss closely linked with climate change. So I'll share a couple of slides with you if the host can give me permission. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, please see to it. That's fine.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so you can see. So before I start, my Kedarnath experience has been more touching experience because this happened in 2013. I was doing my PhD on Kedarnath Wildlife Sanctuary, and I was always knowing right from very beginning, like every year monsoons bring a lot of pressure on mountains. We have these landslides, and we also face flash floods almost every second year. Cloudbursts are more common now. But what happened in 2013 was unexpected when a cloud burst coupled with a lot of other cloud bursts led to massive floods in Kedarnath Valley coming down up to Haridwar and beyond. And our house was the last getting submerged in Srinagar Garhwal. And this was a really alarming situation because a larger part of our property was lost, our belongings were lost. But one of the most important thing that was lost during this climate tragedy was our memories in this house. So that was one face-to-face encounter with what we call as climate change. Now, in all these years and decades of work with biodiversity and climate adaptive solutions that communities are giving to us, I have been able to understand that right now, what we are facing, our coming generations, especially you all, and maybe even your coming generation will face in a very, very tougher way. Where I sit right now, and I am virtually online with you all from Nagpur, in 2000 faced one of the closest encounter with water scarcity when water was rationed for the entire city. And these are some of the small anecdotes that we are listening and facing. But now I'm sure Delhi, Chennai, or any other city in the country is facing these kind of incidences very often. Cities are the new hotspots of climate change. And if you see all these global negotiations, agreements, discussions, dialogues happening are actually directly or indirectly talking about climate change or biodiversity loss. It's a very cross-cutting theme. We are all seeing the politicians and the kind of decisions they are going to take or they are taking on our behalf in these international panels and agreements. Glasgow recently concluded, and you know that it went ahead than what it was expected for almost 2 more days. And we started with a talk about 1.5 degrees centigrade. We need to reduce and keep our temperatures below 1.5 degrees centigrade. The increase should not be more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. But when we concluded with the Glasgow COP, we know that we ended with 2.7 degrees centigrade. Something, and this is something for students like you who are coming from other than science background, maybe a little tough to understand what is this entire theory of 1.5 degrees centigrade, 2.4 and 2.7 degrees centigrade. So this is giving you an idea like what's globally happening right now. Apart from climate COP, the recently virtual Convention on Biodiversity COP that was discussing and deciding on beyond 2020 agenda, the post biodiversity agenda, 2020 agenda, the discussions were in Kunming, China, and they were also talking about eco-civilization, living in harmony with nature. So overall, there is a clear consensus that living in harmony with nature can give you some way when we talk about that we will be able to keep our climate change under control. Now, these are the Panchamrit strategy for climate change, what our Pradhan Mantri ji declared on the very starting of Glasgow convention COP meeting. And they talked about the power sector, forest, emission reductions, carbon emission, and net zero target. So this was strategized with 2030 and 2070 agenda, like how we'll be reducing our power dependence on coal, how we will go from coal to non-fossil fuel energies, how we'll enhance our carbon sinks by additional plantations, increasing our forest cover, and reducing our emission reduction. Now, this becomes very important for students who are sitting in Delhi or in urban areas, that what is the reason we need to reduce our emissions. I'm sure the smog in Delhi gives you a nice idea why we need to reduce our emissions drastically. The one important thing is right now that there is a lot of Western pressure on China and India being fastest developing economies and at the same time highly populated countries to actually go and agree with the kind of targets they are projecting. But at the same time, it is important for you all also to understand that apart from climate, whatever agreement comes in, it's important that it acknowledges and it respects climate justice. Now, this report is also released just 1 or 2 months back, and this is a very important report when we talk about 1.5, 2.4, and 2.7 degrees centigrade, because this scientific report, that's also called as Assessment Report 6 of Working Group 1, and it's a more physical sciences report that says that even if we talk about whatever proper measures, policies, the temperature is going to increase up to 4.5 degrees centigrade. These are the clear projections by scientists. There are varied projections. I'll be quickly touching all of them because I have been allocated only 10 to 15 minutes. And then there is this interesting report by Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, these were the two important intergovernmental bodies that were working separately, parallel on biodiversity and climate change, but this was the very first time. And they came together and they found that the indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, the governance approaches, the economic drivers, the human demographic changes, technological drivers, coupled with direct drivers like direct exploitation of species, pollution, land use, land cover changes, and invasive species, they are basically common. You talk about climate change and biodiversity loss. So if you have to reduce and halt and reverse biodiversity loss, it's the same thing for climate change. So the kind of actions, the coupled actions need to be taken together for reducing climate change and to halt biodiversity loss. So climate restoration or biodiversity restoration has similar kind of concerns. Now, climate change is a very, very big area of research. It's not only for physical scientists. There are so many other reports that are coming in. 2019 was a very important time when this first report on 1.5 degrees centigrade came. Then there was a special report on climate change and land degradation. United Nations Convention Framework on Deforestation and Degradation also came up with a land restoration. And it showed that land degradation is going to be one of the mega drivers of climate change. When from a pristine stage of ecosystem, we start in extensive usage of this land use, maybe agriculture or mining or urbanization, this intensive land use leads to a stage when the agriculture or urbanization or a developmental program leads to abandonment of a land. The land is no more productive. It is a stage when the kind of ecosystem services we are harnessing from any ecosystem are stopped. And this is the stage we call as ecosystem collapse. Unfortunately, in Asia and India, we haven't carried out any ecosystem health assessment. So that means that many of our ecosystems are actually undergoing hidden collapse. So this is an important understanding that you should keep in mind. And I'm sure in Delhi, you might see how your ecosystems that you saw in very childhood and young age are no more there, or they are transforming very fast. Now, 2020 and 2021 was a very important year for all of us. Pandemic took us to something that was unexpected. There were so many deaths and casualties. There were so many patients across the country. And this world got a clear signal. Politicians, planners, international agreements, all these kind of bodies, they got a very clear signal that there has to be a kind of understanding on biodiversity loss, because this can not only lead to climate change, but it can also give rise to a different kind of scenarios. So these disease outbreaks, zoonotics are one of the clear indicators of that. So this report also highlighted that pandemics, there are three important drivers of pandemics. There are land use change, that is again one of the important drivers for climate change. Unsustainable consumption of wild species, again one of the bigger drivers of climate change. And wildlife trade or wildlife trafficking. Now this is one of the indirect drivers, but somehow connected with how we talk about climate change. Another report by Hindu Kush Himalayas, because then we talk about cryosphere. The Himalayan mountains, the Hindu Kush mountains are the water tower for the entire South Asia. But in last few decades, what have happened because of increasing emissions, increasing carbon dioxide in the environment and other greenhouse gases, there is a fast recession of these glaciers. And these are leading to more water in our rivers and the scenarios where there will be less water in the rivers in different time periods. Now the reason is, with all these issues that I've discussed, South Asia has become hotspot of disasters. You talk about floods, drought, landslides, we are in the center of these hotspots. And 1/3 of these disasters are floods. And the second important alarming thing is that these disasters are changing their territory from natural areas to more urban areas. So urban areas are the new hotspots of disasters, and women are more susceptible for these disasters. So what can be the strategies of managing uncertainties? This we'll be discussing during our panel discussion. And as I highlighted in the very starting, it's important for all of you to acknowledge and understand that climate justice as human justice, the resources, and for your understanding, as you all are maybe from the background of commerce or economics, but you understand the climate economics a bit, or maybe later on you will study in future. You know that the age of carbon dioxide is about 200 years. So something that was emitted during the industrial period, the industrialization time of Western world, the global north, is the time, the kind of carbon that was emitted is actually now present in the environment. And what over the time period will be getting emitted will be there for the larger period. So if you see this chart, you know that the highest amount of carbon dioxide over the time period from 1990 onwards has been, the main culprits have been United States, Europe, and Central Asia, East Asia Pacific. South Asia has a very, very small contribution, but if you see the overall almost 200 years of history, we are nowhere in comparison to other bigger countries. And if you see the highest carbon dioxide polluters per capita, you'll find that India doesn't stands here, maybe because of the higher population we have. And somehow India is being termed as one of the 10 biggest polluters of the world. Now, in terms of per capita carbon dioxide emission, this data clearly shows that we are nowhere. Our larger population of the country is still out of development and needs development. And for development, we might need to emit a little more than what we are emitting right now. Obviously, we will be targeting more from cleaner fuels and technologies. So it's important that we understand that our own carbon footprint, our own ecological footprint, our own water footprint. And I'm happy to see how your college has actually got a lot of these things, the solar, the rainwater harvesting, the greenery, and somehow UGC indirectly is trying to inculcate this habit of understanding climate change, understanding your carbon and water footprint at a very, very college level. So this is right now what's happening globally. When the countries in global south, the ones that are most hit because of the climate uncertainties, are asking for their rights, whereas these Western world who are asked for these technologies and financial amount for climate adaptation are not ready and not agreeing to these requests. So the next COP will be mostly targeting on how and what kind of amount should be given to the countries and the technologies so that the entire world adapts with a certain pace and all of us start adapting together. So now these are the different reports that have come up. I'll not take much time on that because I am already exceeding this time, but very briefly, the highlights of these physical reports says that our carbon budgets only assign us 1.5 degrees centigrade of temperature. We have to limit it at 1.5 degrees centigrade because the more carbon we emit, that means we'll be having more temperature rise. So it's an exponential and directly proportional growth in both ways. And both the SR15 and AR6 are the kind of the special report 15 that was on 1.5 degrees centigrade. And the assessment report 6 suggests that world has only 460 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So if you see this graphics and this bar diagram, you'll find that SR15 that talks about 1.5 degrees centigrade says that we have about 455 billion tons of carbon, whereas the recent report with DCRK says we have 460 billion tons of carbon remaining with us, so that we have 50% chances of achieving 1.5 degrees centigrade based on what kind of conservation policies we have. But at the same time, if you see this SR15 carbon budget, it says that we have only 295 billion tons remaining with us if we want to have sustainable change of and keeping us below 1.5 degrees centigrade. Whereas the AR6 report that is released this year, it says that we have a little higher 360 billion tons of carbon remaining with us. This means that if we don't take enough measures at local level, I must say it again, at local level, at individual level, we will actually exhaust the remaining carbon dioxide budget in just 11.5 years. So that means the scenarios that we are projected will be achieved in lesser time. So the targets like 2050 and 2070 will be a kind of a futile exercise. So this is again something that we'll be discussing in the panel discussion for students who want to know a little bit about RCPs. The representative concentration pathway was the different scenario and approach that was taken till the reports that were prepared before AR6 Working Group 1, where now they have included socioeconomic pathways. So that means that earlier it was more climate-centric reports being published where bioclimatic data was integrated, but now socioeconomic challenges, your livelihood, your education, this will again go into this modeling exercise to ascertain what kind of scenarios you have. So India has challenges. The first important challenge is to limit ourselves at 1.5 degrees centigrade. The second important area is understanding that our forest cover is getting lost very fast, very rapidly. And if we don't conserve our forest areas, if we don't conserve our tree outside forest areas, that means urban forest, blue spaces, your wetlands, your aquatic, beautiful wetlands in the cities, it will be an alarming situation for many of the cities. Renewable energy source has to be increased. India itself has one of the pioneers when you talk about clean energy, but again, seeing our population, it has to be increased. And then the challenges are enhanced climate adaptive agriculture in the country. So that means having some kind of technological interventions in how we rear our livestock, how we do our agriculture, especially rice, and population growth and health technology upgradation, economy versus environment will be some of the important discussions that we'll get to hear. India already has its national mission on climate change that has 8 important areas. So you can see that Himalayan ecosystem, solar mission, sustainable agriculture, greening India, energy and sustainable habitats are some of the cross-cutting areas that India is right now talking about, and not only talking about, having a clear implementation from the very local level. So with this, I think it will be good to have a good start with this kind of intervention and understanding on what we have right now in the plate and how we can go ahead with it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We fall short of words while thanking you, ma'am. Your views have brought new insight to our perspective on climate change. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Moving on with this grave discussion, to bring out the concurrent reality of impacts on the life of residents, which could be deciphered with par excellence by our second panelist, Mr. Dalaram Singh. He works in the Administration Department of Environmental Studies, University of Delhi. As he's currently airing organic agriculture in Uttarakhand, he wouldn't join us live today. So let's dive deeper into the discussion through a short video wherein he has explained the complexities that locals confront as a result of climate change and how organic agriculture can help us tackle climate change by reducing greenhouse emissions.
Yeah, we can go ahead with the video, right, Akshat?
Yes, ma'am. Video will be played. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Respected principal sir, teachers, and convener Dr. Neha Goyal, Ecosperity, the Environment Club, and all respected invitees and dear students. A very good afternoon to you all. I would like to say thanks to Team Ecosperity and the Environment Club, Sri Guru Gobind Singh College of Commerce, University of Delhi, for inviting me for commemorating Geography Awareness Week in the college. As you know, basically I am from Almora, Uttarakhand. Therefore, I would like to brief you about my village Dadmi. Dadmi is at an altitude of 1450 meters above sea level, and the village comes under the development block Shalt, district Almora of the Kumaon region of the Himalayan range of Uttarakhand. At a distance of 80 km up from the Corvette Tiger Reserve National Park, Ramnagar, the village is situated at favorable place for chemical-free farming, which have been our traditional farming practices. Such farming practices are essential for maintaining the natural ecosystem of our area. Due to continuous migration from the village, the cultivated lands are being barren, whereas all the farms are free from any synthetic chemicals and pesticides. तो इस प्रकार हम आज के अति ज्वलनशील मुद्दे पर आते हैं, जो कि पैनल डिस्कशंस में मेरे को दिया गया था, इम्पैक्ट ऑफ क्लाइमेट चेंज इन माय एरिया। तो जहाँ पर हम इम्पैक्ट ऑफ क्लाइमेट चेंज इस पर्टिकुलर एरिया में बात करते हैं, तो वो काफ़ी हद तक इम्पैक्ट इसमें पड़ा है, जिससे जो है मैंने अपने यहाँ पे लोकल से डिस्कशन करके कुछ निष्कर्ष निकाले हैं, जिसमें प्रमुख है कि यहाँ की जो लोकल फसल थी कुछ, उनमें से कुछ प्रमुख फसलें जो है धीरे धीरे एक्सटिंक्ट हो रही हैं, लुप्त हो रही हैं, और जो कि क्लाइमेट चेंज का प्रमुख कारण है कि वो फसलें आज सरवाइव नहीं कर पा रही हैं, जिसमें रेड राइस जो यहाँ का बहुत ही प्रमुख फसलों में से एक फसल थी, और रेड राइस जो है हाईली न्यूट्रिशियस फसल थी, और बहुत ही हाईली न्यूट्रिशियस एक फसल है। इसके अलावा दूसरा है फिंगर मिलेट पे भी जो है काफ़ी हद तक जो है इस पर भी असर पड़ा है। फिंगर मिलेट बहुत ही, आप लोग जानते हैं, मिलेट्स में तो आजकल सारी मिलेट्स की डिमांड बहुत बढ़ गई है, तो फिंगर मिलेट्स जो एक प्रमुख फसलों में से एक थी, ये भी जो है धीरे धीरे इसकी जो पैदावार जितनी होती थी वो जो है करीब 50% पे आ गई है। फॉक्सटेल मिलेट्स, ये भी इसका भी जो है काफ़ी ज़्यादा जो है क्लाइमेट चेंज की वजह से इसमें भी काफ़ी हद तक चेंजेज आए हैं। और कुछ और एक राई है जो लोकल सीड है यहाँ की, वो भी उसमें भी जो है उसका भी पैदावार में चेंजेज आए हैं। और दूसरा कारण है अनियमित बारिश होना। इस एरिया में अनियमित बारिश क्लाइमेट चेंज के लिए जो सबसे ज़्यादा प्रभावित अगर हुआ है तो वो चीज़ देखने को मिलती है एरेटिक रेनफॉल। तो ये जो है सबसे ज़्यादा है। जो हम जिस अभी लास्ट अक्टूबर में 16, 17 और 18 अक्टूबर को इतना बारिश हुआ है, जो बारिश कई सालों में लोगों ने यहाँ पे देखा नहीं था, और उस बारिश से लोगों पे जो है बहुत बुरा प्रभाव पड़ा। लोग इस दौरान अपने जो पशुधन है उसके लिए काफ़ी घास इकट्ठा करते थे, और घास को जो है इकट्ठा करके फिर ड्यूरिंग समर जो है वो उनको जो है देते थे। लेकिन अब वो लोग उनको जो है काफ़ी मुश्किलात आएगी और वो लोग मजबूर हो जाएंगे अपने जानवरों को बेचने के लिए। तो ये भी यहाँ का लोकल जो है इस तरह की परेशानियों को फेस कर रहा है, और उसके जो है फेस इस तरह के प्रॉब्लम्स अगर फेस करने पड़ते हैं तो वो धीरे धीरे फिर वो अपने लाइफ स्टाइल में जो है चेंज करता है। तीसरा है टेम्परेचर। जो यहाँ का टेम्परेचर नॉर्मली 15-20 साल में जो टेम्परेचर होता था वो पूरा सभी सीज़नों में 2-2, 4-4 डिग्री अभी ऊपर बढ़ते जा रहा है। जो जून में अगर 30 रहता था तो वो जिस टाइम पे वो 32 से ऊपर जा रहा है, और वैसी विंटर में भी है, विंटर सीज़न में वो 2-2 डिग्री ऊपर है। तो अभी मैं अभी का बात कहूँ तो यहाँ पर अभी बहुत ज़्यादा ठंड होनी चाहिए थी, लेकिन उतना ज़्यादा महसूस नहीं हो रहा है जो जितना हम पहले 8, 10, 15 सालों में पहले ही किया करते थे। तीसरा है अनियमित बारिश का होना। जो बारिश जो है अपने समय से नहीं होती है। और चौथा पॉइंट यह है कि जो हमारे टेम्परेचर है, टेम्परेचर में भी बहुत बदलाव आया है। टेम्परेचर में हर सीजनली अगर हम बात कहें तो 2 से 4 डिग्री सेल्सियस जो है ऊपर बढ़ा है। अगर हम जून जुलाई में देखते हैं तो यहाँ पे जो है टेम्परेचर जो अगर मैक्सिमम 30 जाता था तो वो जो है अभी 34 क्रॉस कर जाता है, 34 to 36। एंड ड्यूरिंग विंटर भी जो है उसी इस सीरीज़ में जो है वो जो है 2 डिग्री और 3 डिग्री जो है ऊपर ही दिखने को मिले। यहाँ के लोग कभी तो टेम्परेचर क्या करते थे, फ्रिज यूज़ नहीं, रेफ्रिजरेटर यूज़ नहीं होता था, कोई भी किसी भी प्रकार का रेफ्रिजरेटर यूज़ नहीं होता था। तो ये धीरे धीरे जो है क्लाइमेट चेंज की वजह से लोग जो है ये अब इन चीज़ों की सुविधा इस तरह की सुविधाओं के लिए की ओर भाग रहे हैं, जबकि नेचुरली यहाँ पर आज से 15-20 साल पहले ये इस तरह की किसी भी जो है आवश्यकता नहीं थी। तो ये भी एक बड़ी समस्या की बात है। अब बात करते हैं कि हम इन परिस्थितियों को लड़ने के लिए हम क्या कदम उठा रहे हैं। जैसे अब मैं अपनी बात कहूँ तो कि मैं इसके लिए क्या कर रहा हूँ। मैंने 2018 में एक प्रोजेक्ट लिखा था फॉर इस्टेब्लिशिंग ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग इन माय विलेज। तो सबमिट किया था एग्रीकल्चर डिपार्टमेंट उत्तराखंड गवर्नमेंट को, और उन्होंने सैंक्शन किया। तो मैं एक प्लेटफॉर्म तक इसको लाने में अभी सक्षम हूँ। दूसरा, हम वाटर कंजर्वेशन के लिए जो है गड्ढे कर रहे हैं। कुछ जिन जगहों पे लैंड जो है बैरन होगी, लोग प्लान कर रहे हैं, और वहाँ पर हम इतनी सिचुएशन ऐसी है कि हम जो है वहाँ पे खेती नहीं कर पा रहे हैं। तो हम वहाँ पर जो है उन खेतों में जो है बड़े बड़े गड्ढे करके और रेन वाटर ताकि उसको सींच लें, और एक बड़ा रेन वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग भी कर रहे हैं वहीं पे, और उन गड्ढों को ताकि वो उसको सींच ले, और जो है हमारे जो वाटर सोर्सेस हैं वो दोबारा से जो है रिचार्ज हो जाएं। और दूसरा, फार्मिंग को बढ़ावा दे रहे हैं ताकि अपनी लोकल सीड्स को बचा सकें, लोकल फार्मिंग की ओर वापस आके अपने जो है क्रॉप्स को वापस ला सकें, और प्लांटेशन हम कर रहे हैं यहाँ पे। तो इस तरह के हम कार्य कर रहे हैं, और मैं सभी लोगों से भी यही आग्रह करूँगा कि जो है ये पृथ्वी में जो है रहने के लिए हमको पहले पर्यावरण चाहिए, वातावरण चाहिए, फिर जो है हमको पैसा और ऐशो आराम चाहिए। अगर हमारे पास पर्यावरण वातावरण ही नहीं रहेगा, पानी ही नहीं रहेगा, तो हम किसी भी चीज़ को ये एक नेचुरल, एक प्रकृति द्वारा दिए गए ऐसी वस्तुएं हैं जिसे हम जो है खरीद नहीं सकते। तो इस आज के पैनल डिस्कशन से मैं ये मैसेज देना चाहूँगा सभी लोगों को कि आओ और साथ में हम इस सुंदर पृथ्वी को बचाएं और आगे की पीढ़ियों को एक सुंदर वातावरण देने की पूर्ण कोशिश करें। अब हम आपको अपने एक सीनियर ताऊ जी से रूबरू कराएंगे जो प्रिंसिपल रिटायर्ड हैं और उनसे पूछेंगे कि उन्होंने अपने समय में अब तक क्या क्या क्लाइमेट चेंज, क्या क्या पर्यावरण परिवर्तन अपने इस एरिया में देखा है। तो ताऊ जी, पहले हमारा इस एरिया का पर्यावरण कैसा होता था और आज की डेट में अब क्या आप उसमें चेंजेस देख रहे हैं?
बोले
हाँ,
ऐसा है, पहले जो हमारे वहाँ मतलब जो पर्यावरण की स्थिति थी बहुत अच्छी थी, फसल होती थी
जी
हैं, धान झुंगरा मडुआ
जी,
भाट गहत,
यस,
ये अच्छी फसल हो जाती थी
जी जी
हैं।
जी
आज उस पर्यावरण मतलब इतना प्रदूषित हो गया है, पानी पर्याप्त मिल जाता था पहले, आज पानी के सारे स्रोत जो हैं बिल्कुल सूखे, जो पारंपरिक स्रोत थे हमारे
जी जी
हैं।
जी
और फसलें जो है मतलब भाट गहत मडुआ झुंगरा
जी
ये बिल्कुल ना के बराबर हो रही
जी
हैं। उसके बाद बाहरी मतलब घास ने
हाँ
आक्रमण
हाँ
कर
हाँ,
लिया है,
जो इन्वेजिव प्लांट्स
हाँ,
हैं, हाँ
जो
जी
पतझड़ हैं,
जी जी,
और पानी के स्रोत जो हैं वो
धीरे धीरे सूखते जा
धीरे
रहे हैं।
धीरे बिल्कुल
उसका
समाप्ति की ओर
उसका एक कारण ये भी है, जो लोग प्लान कर दे रहे हैं और खेत जो है बंजर भी हो रहे हैं, तो पानी बारिश होती है लेकिन बह जाता है।
हाँ, ये भी एक कारण है।
जी जी, और
इसके लिए भी बहुत सारे कारण हैं।
जी जी,
मतलब इसके पीछे खेत बंजर के हो गए, एक तो प्लान हो गया है,
प्लान हो गया,
बेरोजगारी हो गई,
बेरोजगारी हो गई,
दूसरा ये जो गवर्नमेंट की स्कीम थी बैलों पर
जी जी,
प्रतिबंध लग गया, जिससे लोगों ने भयभीत होकर बैल नहीं पाले
पाले,
हैं।
जी जी
उससे भी खेती आधी जो लोग घर में थे वो तो करते,
जी जी, तो
लेकिन
उससे भी वो चीज़ हटी तो पर्यावरण पर उसका भी
हाँ,
फर्क पड़ा,
बिल्कुल पर्यावरण पर उसका बिल्कुल असर पड़ा।
क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ पर पहले से झुंवर होता
हाँ,
था, वो आज एक लाल धान होता था,
हाँ, लाल धान होता था जिसका चावल जो है खाने
बहुत ही
को
पौष्टिक,
हाँ,
बहुत पौष्टिक था,
और खाने में इंटरेस्ट था उसका।
जी जी जी,
उसकी जो माड़ भी निकलती थी वो भी मतलब
बहुत कैल्शियम रिच होता था,
कैल्शियम युक्त थी।
जी 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 जी।
तो अब
धीरे धीरे मतलब आपको ये लग रहा है कि पर्यावरण उस टाइम से और आपके टाइम में काफी चेंज हुआ है?
बहुत चेंज हो गया हमारे टाइम में। मतलब मैं ये 15 साल पहले की बात बता रहा हूँ
जी जी,
कि 15 साल पहले हमारे यहाँ मतलब झुंगरा धान मडुआ बहुत पर्याप्त मात्रा में मिलता था। आज हम उसके लिए तरस रहे हैं, 1-1 किलो लेकर के मोल खा रहे हैं कहीं से।
जी जी जी
हैं?
जी,
तो इस प्रकार
ये अपने आप इतने चेंजेज आ गए हैं,
बहुत चेंजिंग आ गई,
हाँ काफी चेंजेस हैं।
और पानी के स्रोत तो बिल्कुल ऐसे हुए कि
हाँ धीरे धीरे आए दिन सूखते जा रहे हैं।
10-10 20-20 किलोमीटर दूरी से पानी आ रहा है गाँव में, वो भी मतलब।
अच्छा ताऊ जी, एक बड़ा क्वेश्चन ये है कि क्या आप थोड़ा टेम्परेचर में भी बढ़ा हुआ समय देखते हैं कि पहले जैसे जून जुलाई में इतनी गर्मी नहीं होती थी और अब उस समय में ज़्यादा गर्मी लगती है?
टेम्परेचर भी बढ़ गया है। मैं ये है अपने मकान की बात बता रहा हूँ। मैंने जब हमने शुरू सन 76 में ये मकान बनाया यहाँ पर
जी,
तो हमने पंखे की बात तो सोची नहीं थी, इतना ठंडा था,
और कोई फ्रिज नहीं होता था।
नहीं, मई जून के महीने में भी यहाँ मतलब ठंडा होता था।
हाँ जी,
लेकिन आज ऐसा है कि जाड़ों में भी वो ठंडा नहीं है, गर्मियों में तो पंखे की जरूरत पड़ रही है।
और जबकि हमारा अल्टीट्यूड है 1500 मीटर समुद्र लेवल से ऊपर। हाँ, तो बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद ताऊ जी का, और उन्होंने अपने जो है एक्सपीरियंस को जो है हमारे साथ साझा किया। थैंक यू। ये प्लांट मात्र 2 साल का प्लांट है और किस तरह से एकदम ऑर्गेनिक एंड नेचुरल संतरे इसमें आ रहे हैं।
Well, I must acknowledge his contribution. He is a true environmentalist in his own sense. Because while I was doing masters and PhD at the department, he used to help us with so many administrative stuff, and he used to aid us during practicals of masters. But I would say that it was worth learning from him, that how whatsoever he learned, the concepts he learned being at the department, he tried to transcend that information to his village. He always used to tell us stories about CFL tubes being incorporated, being the local people of Uttarakhand being sensitized towards energy conservation through the use of CFL tubes. He used to tell us, इस बार मुझे 10 लोगों ने order दिया है, इस बार 20 लोगों ने order दिया है, मैं दिल्ली से लेकर जाऊंगा उनके लिए. You know, and now I would say that how he has promulgated this idea of organic farming, and now, you know, especially in his own village, and as he rightly mentioned in his video, that it is a part of their traditional practice that they have been following organic farming. So basically, you know, we are in the phase of learning, unlearning, and, you know, relearning the environment. And we are really grateful to have his video here being played here. It was very tough for him to send this video to us from, you know, the hills of Uttarakhand, but he came 5 to 10 kilometers down to specially send this video to us. And we are thankful to you, Dharambiya. We are thankful to you. Thank you so much. And I welcome you, Rituraj sir, for joining us. Yeah, over to you, Akshit and Shifa.
Indeed, ma'am, indeed. We are immensely grateful to Mr. Dharam Singh for sharing this intuitive reality of Uttarakhand. It was indeed eye-opening for all of us that even though climate change is a global issue, its effects are felt most acutely at the local levels. Now, we would entrust our eminent keynote speakers who are already paving the way for a better future. We welcome Ms. Rashi Sirohi to offer a non-governmental organization's perspective. Her colleague, Ms. Tanya Isser, has also made tremendous contribution for the same, but couldn't join us today. Both of them are working towards providing a sustainable and creative solutions using their professional skills. Let's get remedy to this problem because the world is reaching the tipping point beyond which climate change may become irreversible.
Thank you so much. I'll just share my screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you need to just, unshare it so that I can share it. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, I'll just do that.
Amisha, please take care.
Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So good evening to one and all present here. First of all, thank you so much, all of you, and especially Neha ma'am, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to connect, especially with the youth, the upcoming youth of this country, and the enthusiastic people around. So it feels so good to connect with them and to give them a brief like what's happening around the globe and what we are trying to implement on ground as per our skills and expertise. So basically, it's a very interesting panel discussion, and it has taken its course organically, like how Shaili ma'am has explained her experience during the Kedarnath time, and how the entrepreneur from Uttarakhand coming right from the land of hilly areas is explaining his contribution. So basically, now I'll take you through the possible and the potential solution which we try to implement on ground with the Uttarakhand local community. And this was the attempt which Development Alternatives did in collaboration with other research institutes as well as the education institutions. This was a project that started in 2016 and it just got ended in this year itself. So as you can see, the title for this project was the Design and Technologies for Disaster Resilient and Environmentally Responsible Buildings, especially in the mountain regions. So today I'll be focusing on three most important aspects, that is your resource, livelihoods, and disaster resilience. So this is just to give you all a very brief insight about the project. It lies in the district of Uttarkashi, which is highly vulnerable to disaster risk as it comes into the zone 4. And basically our project focused on majorly three important components. First, the community building in Kamat village. So Kamat is a very small village which is located in in Uttarkashi district, and it is around 50 to 60 kilometers from Uttarkashi itself. And it's a very small hamlet. It's not known by the tourist or by the people. So it is still under the development stage. And this was the attempt which we did for the upliftment or to make it Atmanirbhar in its own way. The second was the ecotourism homestays in the Kamat and the Bagi village, the surrounding clusters of the village, and in which we trained the people, the community people, and we gave them hospitality training so that it develops itself into a form of homestays, and these people have some sort of ownership, resulting into the employment and revenue generation. The third is the residential building in another village, that is the Siror village. So all these three villages are very close to each other, and we gave lots of trainings in various technologies about which I'll be explaining further. So just a brief, like what exactly is happening in Uttarakhand. So you people have already got an idea from our two panelists. So one is the most important, that is the need for disaster resilience, because just to give you an idea in terms of the figures, the average economic loss was about INR 2545 crores as per the 2019 disaster risk report, which is a huge loss. The second important component is the need for livelihood generation, because as ma'am has also mentioned, during COVID, like what massive destruction was happened in Uttarakhand. And most importantly, due to reverse migration, almost 20,000 people returned back out of 70,000 in Pauri Garhwal, as per the Indian Express ground report. And this third is the very crucial important, that is the need for resource optimization, because it is anticipated that the tourism infrastructure is expected to increase 3 times by 2030. This means it is the increasing consumption of cement is highly, it is increasing a lot in mountain regions, and due to which it is affecting the carbon footprint, the local community, the flora fauna, and most importantly the fragile ecosystem of the Uttarakhand. And it is also majorly because of the low awareness about how one should utilize the consumption, how one should use the efficient resources within the community. So this is also one of the major reason about this particular factor. Now, this is basically a glimpse of interventions which we did on ground with the community. So taking you step by step through all these 4 figures. Firstly, what we did was we introduced the low carbon resource efficient building materials and technologies. For example, we introduced the mud bricks, we introduced the door window technology, the roofing technologies, and your building material technologies. So I'll further explain you in detail about these. And secondly, what we tried to do was we integrated these technologies in the form of disaster resilient components. Like basically our design took care of all the structural components, of all the structural integrity around that area, and focusing on that particular footprint, that particular geography, because it is very important to design a particular house or any particular built structure, keeping in mind the topography of that area. Hence, you can see like what has happened in the Kedarnath tragedy and how ma'am has also explained her own experience. And thirdly, we supported the community through a lot of community participation and social inclusion. We basically conducted various capacity building programs also for the women. Like we created this self-help group, and the women themselves made these mud blocks, and all these materials were then incorporated into the community building itself. So everything was happening right there on ground. And the yellow machine which you can see is the Tara Balram technology by Development Alternatives itself, and we kind of bought that machine there, and these people are currently using it for themselves, for their buildings, and all the new construction that is taking place over there. And lastly, when we were when we saw that how this project is taking place, because it was very new, it was a total risk, a total, what do you call it, adventurous thing to see how it is taking its shape. So then based on the performances, based on the training programs that were given, we gave sense of ownership, and like in the form of it, you can say we set up the enterprises, small micro enterprises of all these units, of the mud bricks, of your precast products, of your pine shingle for the roofing system in the village itself for the villagers. So, and these people were further trained in Dehradun also for like how do you build the roof and all. So all this is just a crux of it, because the project is very huge, and keeping in mind the time slot, I'm trying to be as much specific I can. So we can also have a detailed discussion later on. So then what exactly was the criteria. So I'll try to explain to you in a very simple language. For example, the brown one means what we wanted to achieve, and the black one means how we should achieve it, or how did we achieve it. For example, if I want to achieve the aspect of affordability, so I need to take care of the cost of the construction of building element and its maintenance. Or for example, I want to achieve the target of job creation or your local economy component. So I need to see that how the people are getting the jobs, how these people are getting trained, how the entrepreneurs are getting formed out of the local community or local economy, keeping them self-sustained and self-reliant. And this is just the assessment. I won't go further into these details. I can explain if the need be later on. So this is just to give an idea that what is the comparison going on between your red bricks. So the red brick means the red bricks, which you all can see, the one which we use in our own houses. And the stabilized compressed earth block means the mud bricks. So you can see the footprint of it. It's such a drastic differences there between these two. For example, these two technologies. Like just to explain a bit, if I want to see the component of thermal comfort. So I won't achieve this a lot in my red brick, but I can achieve this thing in the mud bricks, the thermal comfort means. So the bigger the plot area, the more balanced its shape, so the more sustainable the technology is. This is the simple, the logic to understand these graphs. And this is the final outcome, the final picture. So for example, these are the 6 technologies. Step by step, I'll start from the left. The Pinewood Shingles. So you can see this is the truss. The truss is one of the roofing element which we use to construct the house, especially in the hilly areas. So this is being built by the community itself, and these people were trained by the Forest Research Institute, Dehradun. Like we took the carpenters over there, they got trained, they came back, they practiced the same thing in their own villages. The enterprises were set up over there, and these shingles were then used in this building itself. So you can see the amount of carbon footprint. Like it's an attempt, like how much can you control it? I won't say like we have achieved it to a maximum limit, but an attempt to control it in a manner. For example, and the second is your precast concrete plank and joist roofing. So this is also one of the roofing technology. It reduces the consumption of cement and concrete, unlike our normal roofing system, like how we see it in our own houses. This is a very modular way to do it. And this particular technology is also being produced by the entrepreneur whom we trained, and he is based in Uttarkashi. So everything was coming from 50-kilometer radius. So this is also one of the attempt. And your third is, if you can see, there is a band-like structure in the bottom, and it is a very interesting concept. So the building is kind of divided, like there are 2 parts of the building, but from the foundation, it is being tied. Even if the earthquake comes, so the entire building won't collapse or just fall down, but it will like kind of move together in a proper manner. So this is also one of the major thing which technologies kind of lack in mountainous region, and the major reason behind the earthquake. So this was an attempt in the design which we followed as per the structural guidelines. Yeah, and on the right, you can see the concrete blocks are being made on the site itself. So it was a demonstration. One part of the building used mud bricks. Other part of the building, you can see, used the CB, the concrete block. And then the assessment criteria were being followed. And your fifth is your precast door window frame. So the attempt was to keep the building as much light as possible, rather than just loading it into a very heavily structured or heavily weight structure. And your last is the compressed earth blocks, the mud bricks. So the soil was procured from the local areas itself. It was not getting somewhere out of the box or getting somewhere from other part of the city. It was a local soil of that village, and a graphical representation of the same. So below you can see all the 6 technologies along with a color code. and how it is being implemented in the building itself. The random rubble masonry, the earth block masonry. So just for everybody's understanding, random rubble masonry means your stone masonry. Like in Pahadi language, it is known as Ar Par Pathar. So you use the local stone of that area along the riverside area, and you break it down, and then these people constructed that particular build like the walls of it. So you can see the breadth, and followed by the other technologies. So this is like I have already explained a bit about all these. I won't go into a much detail because these are very, you can say, very architectural terms or structural terms. So these are just the specialities of this particular community building. And sum up, like we did the production training, we did the construction training. These people got trained. They used the same techniques in the building itself. And then lastly, the entrepreneurs were trained, like this enterprises were being set up. So you can say on your right, on the right, you can see there is an enterprise setup of your precast products, and the same person is supplying all these products to our building. And similarly, other enterprises were being set up in that area itself. This is the final look of the building. So this is just a very brief strategic framework, like, what could be what was the approach and what were the challenges. For example, like it is very important that we encourage uptake of these techniques by local community, the policy and the fiscal support for, so that people adopt these building hubs or these building technologies. Because once the project is done, the major challenge starts right from there, that how people have, accepted these technologies, or if the new construction is happening, are they using the same technologies, or are they still going into the concrete or the cement one? So still we are in the process of, assessment stage once the project is being done. And during COVID, this community building was used, by the quarantine people who were migrating back to their villages, and it was a very great help to them during that time. And we conducted a lot of trainings in this building itself. So very interesting last technology was, you can see in the green, there is a green tank. It is a Jal Tara filter, another technology by development alternatives, because the water is not at all suitable for drinking purposes. So we installed that filter. The community people were trained. Thus, there is a school right next to this building. The children were being trained. They were being understood that, what is the importance of all these components, or how, as a young child, as a youth, how they can take care of their village, of this building, and of the people around them. So that was also one of the small trainings that we did. And lastly, one of the approaches, how do you incorporate all this into a circular and resource efficiency model, and how do you build the local strength of the people, hence resulting into sustainable livelihoods. So this is just all from my side, and I'm open to further detailed discussion. I'm sure you might be having lots of questions or thoughts. So I'm also willing to have a detailed conversation after this panel if anybody wants to connect with me, because I understand this is a very technical thing, and it's a very small crux that I have shown to you, and a lot is there to be discussed. So thank you so much. Thank you.
That's how an engineer truly works. Thank you, Rashi ma'am. This insightful thought will surely impress the young minds.
Now, to bring a writer's perspective to the panel discussion, we would welcome Mr. Rituraj Phukan, an environmental activist and writer from Assam, the land rich in biodiversity and climate. Bringing a drastic change to his career after quitting his government job to begin a lifelong engagement with nature, traveling, writing, and teaching students about the environment, wildlife, and climate change.
Currently, he works as a Secretary General of Green Guard Nature Organization, a civil society group working with fringe forest communities to explore and establish sustainable solutions for management of man-animal conflict. He also serves as a Chief Operating Officer of Walk for Water, a group that is leading a global water conservation movement with a mission to provide universal accessibility to safe water.
Can I start?
Yes, sir. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me here. And uh, congratulations to Ecosperity Environment Club of the Guru Gobind Singh College of Commerce, University of Delhi, for organizing this. Am I audible? Is it all clear?
Yes, sir. You're audible.
Yes, sir.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. And this is a very interesting conversation. Of course, I've been hearing, listening to all the brilliant presentations that has, absolutely been spot on about the science and about all those initiatives that are happening in many places. Uh, as some of you know, I just returned from Glasgow for I was there for the COP26 and had a so-called ringside view of the proceedings during my time over there. Uh, the writer's perspective, that is such a huge story because I have always believed that climate change is about the people. It is more of what human impacts that we need to now really focus on. And as some of the speakers have said in the beginning or before me, the world is slowly shifting towards understanding how people are being affected. If you look back at what was happening in the previous COPs, it was, or even the kind of economic, um, development model that we have chosen. It's always about GDP and all numbers, but more and more people are realizing that it is about the human impact. So as a writer, I found so much happening all around me. Right from the day I started my journey to meeting people on the plane who were headed the same way. You must realize that there were about the 20,000 or more people who arrived at Glasgow for the conference. Uh, One of the most important constituents of this COP was the presence of indigenous people, the indigenous youth representatives, the various indigenous organizations that have come all the way from Amazon, from Mesoamerica, from Indonesia, and from Africa. And the voices of these indigenous people is that uh, we are at the front lines of the climate crisis without having contributed anything significant to greenhouse gas emissions. We control so much of the remaining natural places on Earth. We are managing them very sustainably for millennia. So give us a say in these negotiations. Give us our due to protect and restore the natural places on Earth so that the biodiversity and the climate crises can both be uh, handled properly, and we can still restore the lost planetary ecosystems. Now, another big story, I think the biggest story that has been around is that COP26 basically has not done or what it was mandated to do, or that it is a failure. Uh, so there is something that I wrote. I'm not going to be apologetic about saying that it is a small step, although towards progress and not a failure. So I'm going to read out a few paragraphs from a op-ed I just wrote today. Uh, and it is about the conference, about COP26. So the 26th Conference of Parties, or COP26, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change at Glasgow concluded with the signing of the Glasgow Climate Pact last week. Now, we all know that the high expectations from COP26 were partly fueled by months of news headlines dominated by heat waves, wildfires, storms, floods, and so many alarming studies, including the Code Red for Humanity published on the 9th of August, which is the first assessment report of or the first part of the sixth assessment report. Now, that said, we could pass 1.5 degree rise in temperatures above pre-industrial levels by within the next 10 years or so. Now, one of the things that made this COP unique was that it is first one held after the pandemic, so there were a lot of other restrictions, COVID protocols in place. So that is in itself a big story. Access was limited. The green zone was open, of course, and the blue zone, where most of the negotiations are taking place, was accessible only to observers. And but still there were at least 10,000 of us having badges, so it was quite a crowded place. I realized that the negotiations do not take place in one place. There were like at least 12 big plenary halls where all sorts of discussions were taking place, and it was just impossible to be there and do everything. So we spent a lot of time moving from place to place and looking at stories that we wanted to learn. And then there were the country pavilions, which were all hosting their own events as well. Now, the outcome, the final outcome, that's the Glasgow Climate Pact that was inked one day later on the 13th, then the scheduled closing, now has been widely described as a compromise, an agreement to do better next year. Yes, the pact has kept the prospect of achieving the target of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius alive by calling on countries to come back next year with increased ambitions. Now, this is itself a big plus point. According to the Paris Agreement, countries were required to submit updated NDCs or increase their ambitions every 5 years. So here we have the Glasgow Pact calling countries to come back next year to Egypt with better targets, so that we still have the 1.5 degrees Celsius within achievable framework. Now, of course, there are a lot of reasons why this happens. We know that negotiations take place in multiple levels. It is not just the COP, but it has continued for weeks and months, and in some cases years before it started. But this year was again unique because we had a people's advocate, Sir David Attenborough. He was on stage as somebody who was representing the interests of the common people. The hundreds of thousands who were out on the streets of Glasgow every day in rain, the thousands which were outside the blue zone protesting with placards and slogans practically every day. And even within the blue zone, there were a lot of observers and other representatives from civil society who would make sure that the voices of the people was heard by the world leaders who were making all the decisions. The story of COP26 is really the story of climate finance, and that was the most debated topic, with developed countries having acknowledged shortly before the commencement of the conference that they had failed to provide the 110 billion per year in climate finance that they were required to provide from last year to developing countries. And this was something that was signed way back in 2009, and they have not done that. So obviously, countries from the global south were very, very skeptical. They talked about trust and credibility and accountability, and that added to the tense atmosphere that was already there because of civil society protests, because of indigenous peoples wanting to be part of the actual negotiations themselves, but being kept out of that, or not been mandated to do that. So this was a big, big issue, and climate finance really was a catalyst for a lot of disagreements as well. Of course, now it is agreed that the $100 billion per year is inadequate, and India alone asked for about 1 trillion for mitigation and adaptation as well. Then, of course, in the end, the developed countries agreed to double, or at least double, they say, their collective provision of climate finance for adaptation by 2025. there was another big issue, and I think you know, this is something that it will be heard over and over again, and it resonates with what is happening in India with extreme weather events, people at the front lines of storms and floods and the water crisis. Uh, Very few people talk about loss and damage, but that is actually the third pillar of the Paris Agreement, along with the adaptation and mitigation. So this year, countries including India and China, in fact, all the G77 nations wanted a new agreement called the Glasgow Loss and Damage Facility, but it was not signed. But there was just some fund allocation made to the Santiago Network for Loss and Damage that was signed back in Madrid in the COP25. Uh, but developed countries were very reluctant to sign something that would commit them to start paying compensation for floods and extreme weather events around the world because of their historical contribution to climate change. So that is a big, one of the biggest problems in world climate negotiations after climate finance. A lot of good things did happen actually, and that one key outcome I would say is the conclusion of the Paris Agreement rule book, which will make the agreement fully operational. There were some doubts about the clean development mechanism, which allowed countries to. There was a loophole which allowed countries to, double count their emissions or the credits earned from reduction in emissions. But I think that has now been resolved. Uh, then more than 30 countries and financial institutions signed a statement committing to halt all financing for fossil fuels uh, development activities overseas. So that is a good news, and that money will be diverted to clean energy as well. Uh, there was another announcement about uh, working together to promote clean technologies and help deploy it in weaker countries. I think one of the biggest stories emerging out of COP26 is, of course, the global methane pledge. A lot has been written about it by different writers, and the issue also found mention for the first time in the Code Red for Humanity report released in August, because methane is very much connected to how we produce food. So it is very touchy subject, but here we had a pledge that was not signed by India, China, and Russia, but at least 105 countries have signed it to reduce, and the target or the aim is to reduce methane emissions by 30% uh, from 2020 levels in the next 10 years. How they do it is uh, something yet to be decided. Again, more than 100 countries and more than 100 entities, mostly companies, but a few countries included, decided to sign the Glasgow Accord on zero emissions vehicles by 2040. Now, India was a step ahead because India announced that by 2030 we will uh, have no petrol or diesel cars on the roads. So that's a big announcement. There were very important announcements regarding deforestation, and I think I will end with that. That will be my last one. Uh, the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forest and Land Use was signed by more than 130 countries, promising to work collectively to halt and preserve forest loss and land degradation by 2030. Then there was a forest, agriculture, and commodity trade fact dialogue, again signed by 28 countries who are representing the majority of trade in key commodities that contribute to deforestation. So countries like Indonesia, with his palm oil and all, were part of this. So this, I think, are both these two agreements are very positive, and uh, I'd just like to add that, having a ringside view of the proceedings at the negotiations uh, was great, but I was also witness to the anxiety of the youth and the anger of the affected communities, including indigenous peoples, youth groups from all over the world. Uh, I was I listened to Greta at the George Square on the 5th, and along with so many other indigenous young leaders. And on the 6th, the march with the protesters from Calvin Grove Park uh, to Glasgow Green in the pouring rain, and with 150,000 other people demanding climate justice now. And climate justice definitely is the most important issue that has emerged out of COP26. Uh, with that, I thank you once again for having me share my uh, insights from Glasgow. Thank you.
What an encouraging experience it was to know how a writer talks about the global concerns and his fluency in conduct of his words. Sir, we are truly enamored by your informative and knowledgeable words. Thank you so much, sir.
Now, for an interactive session, I would request the attendees to put in their questions in the chat box for a quick interactive session with our panelists present here. So,
the first question is posed to Rituraj, sir. So the question is, climate action must come from the whole spectrum of civil society. How can I play my part?
Great question, and I think everybody must uh, be part of the climate movement. That itself is an act of leadership. Uh, Greta famously said at Glasgow that the real leadership is not inside there, not in the negotiating halls. It is out here on the street, and I think that is a huge that plays a huge part in how these negotiations go, how world leaders act. They feel the pressure to listen to their constituencies. So, as a young person, I think it is important that you make yourself familiar with what climate change is about. I work with a group called Subject to Climate, where we try to integrate climate change education into existing curriculums and all subjects in K-12 education, and it is open source for all teachers and students. Uh, so to make climate education a part of your growing up of your personality, it may not be in the curriculum, but it should be something that you embrace, because your world depends on it, and you got to learn and teach everyone. One thing that I like to always say, that each one teach one. So as a young person, the best thing you can do, I mean, there are a lot of lifestyle changes you can embrace, but I think that is best left discovered by yourself. Each person can make his own informed consumer choice, rather than me telling or anybody else telling what to do or what not to do. But yes, information is key, not only learning but also sharing. Thank you.
yeah. As the next question comes, thank you, sir, for the insightful answer. Now, as the next question comes for Shalini, ma'am. How does climate change affect plankton?
Thank you so much for this question. And it's a very, very scientific and important questions, because we have always been talking about trees and vegetation and forests when we talk about carbon stocks and carbon sinks. It's a very important question in lines, and I'm thankful to the student who has asked. We know that even our marine areas are one of the biggest lungs of carbon sinks. They sequester a lot of carbon for us. And also the wetlands, the freshwater wetlands, where we know these tiny microorganisms called phytoplanktons, different kind of algae are there, diatoms are there, that are microscopic in nature, but are very efficient in terms of capturing the atmospheric carbon dioxide and storing it in the biomass, the growth of their cells, and the smaller algal bodies in the presence of chlorophyll, they take this carbon dioxide. Now, about the impact of climate change and phytoplankton has been a very, very complex and critical questions that a lot of scientists are working on. We also started some study on understanding how the diatoms in these are one types of phytoplanktons in urban areas, urban water bodies, how they can help us to ensure that we conserve wetlands, because we know their strategic role as carbon sequesters. So what will happen if we see some of the scenarios that are developed globally? They say that a good amount of nutrition is very important for these, that is already dissolved in the water for these phytoplanktons. But as the kind of greenhouse gases are growing, and the kind of pollutants that are reaching these water bodies and marine areas, this might lead to some kind of acidification of these lakes and water bodies and marine areas. And also they might increase water temperature. That's obvious with the kind of day temperature that we are observing is increasing. So this mild acidification and enhanced nutrient reaching the water bodies might lead to algal blooms. So this is a common phenomena if you see in wetlands and water bodies, where you see these kind of saturated water bodies, where you see a lot of green growth, not in terms of eichhornia you see as plants, but basically the algal blooms. So I'm not sure for economics and commerce background students how they understand these terms, but these kind of algal blooms might be increasing in nature. And these algal blooms are also one of the reasons that we have a lot of toxins being released in the water bodies. So once these toxins are released in the water bodies, and you know that phytoplanktons are a very important part of aquatic food web, the food chain that runs in water bodies. So that will affect these food chains, food webs, and the kind of toxins that are released will affect the larger invertebrates and vertebrates present in the water. So these might be the fishes, the zooplanktons, and benthic organisms. So overall, if we see the climate change impact, it's complex and it might drastically affect in terms of increasing algal blooms and increased release of toxins that might lead to death of also these phytoplankton. So you can say that it can affect the carbon sequestration potential ongoing in the freshwater as well as marine areas. So I hope this addresses your query and gives you some understanding on what will happen.
Indeed, ma'am, that was a very wonderful answer. The next question is posed to Rashi ma'am, which is, what is climate change in humanity's strive for sustainable development?
I think like that's a very debatable question indeed. When I was on ground, like when I witnessed whatever was happening, whatever processes we were conducting with the local community, so they were not even aware that why are we doing it, or why do they need to understand certain components, or what is the benefit they will get. So that was very you should not call it sympathetic, but it was very bad to see that certain awareness is not there, and that system is so rich in all the aspects, like all the systems are coming together, your economic, political, socio-technological, cultural, and which is adding value to the system, in fact. So rather than imposing your thoughts on them, rather than telling that adapt this technology or adapt this, so we conducted participatory exercises. Like we first understood their point of view, that how they are thinking about this problem, or what are the problems they are facing in terms of, you can say, like thermal comfort is a technological term, for example, how are they feeling inside their rooms. And as you have seen the video of the entrepreneur and the aged man who was explaining his viewpoints, so similarly we got to know a lot of insights from the local panchayati people, from women. And just to bring across this, it's a very strong point, like women in Uttarakhand, they work majorly for 18 plus hours, or mostly like 20 hours, because male migration is a massive problem in Uttarakhand. Because of all these reasons, there are no jobs, there are no employment, and due to which the women have to work a lot, managing the construction as well as the domestic chores. So like keeping in mind all these aspects, it was their idea, it was their viewpoint, which we carved out using our expertise. So it is very important, whenever you work on ground with local people, never force your viewpoints on your thoughts on them. Just listen, like what, even if that problem existing or not, even if it is there or not, So this was also one of the major learning, in fact, for me as an architectural student right after my graduation and till now. And this is also one of the major factor which kind of drove me into this thing. And I would also encourage you people, like, just give it a thought, like, all these things really count and add a lot of value addition. So your knowledge, your expertise will also matter a lot, whatever work you will do or in whatever field you chose to. But it is important that how do you connect with people and have a people-centric approach with them. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think Shalini ma'am has something to add to it.
Thank you. I think what Rashi has mentioned, I very much resonate with her thoughts, and especially the idea that when we are trying the technological intervention, especially for local communities, we should not try to impose our thoughts, because as she mentioned, and as I personally believe that so much of these hybrid knowledge frameworks where we talk about science and indigenous knowledge networks, I think they are much more advanced in terms of understanding climate impacts, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation. So if we want to have a sustainable development that is more judicious and more respecting in these communities and also our future generations, sharing our resources and saving their resources at the same time, it's important that sometimes we keep our crown of these scientists somewhere on one side and try to learn what these communities have to share with us. My personal experience of last so many, at least 1.5 decade right now, and I see that most of these experiences in this panel are coming from especially Uttarakhand and Eastern Himalayas. I see that there is a lot still that policy planners, urban planners, we as scientists need to learn. Because if I'm saying that climate adaptation is required, I think these communities who are facing these threats of climate change right away are the ones who are adapting at a very faster pace than us. And their decades of experience in doing this can really help us. And climate change is going to play a very, very important role for sustainable development, especially I gave one perspective, what Rashi has mentioned, for urban area, rural areas. And now when we talk of urban areas, I think another question is directly linked to it. So I would like to answer here right away, is about intergenerational partnerships in mainstreaming in governance pathways of environmental conservation and climate change. There is already a lot of hue and cry and a lot of youth activists. We also started as youth professionals. So I think there is a disconnect between generations unless a senior and established leader thinks that the emerging leaders need to understand it much before, the way they understood. For example, if I get to learn something at the age of 40, and if I don't share the same experience for somebody like you who are in the very early age, I think it's a loss for my generation and your generation as well. And it's important that and this is already happening globally. You talk about IUCN or United Nations environmental program or any other governmental agency, intergovernmental agency, they are very keen on indigenous and local people and youth partnerships. And these similar kind of hand holding is very much required if we talk about having the examples and implementation programs. Rashi has implemented something at a very, very early age, I think with a good group of good intergenerational collaboration in her organization. Similarly, if these kind of activities have a pace and we enhance, and instead of we preaching you all like what should be done, I'm sure many of you have your own voices of your own experiences of what you have learned through social media, what you have learned through your classes, your teachers, and other friendly experiences with your colleagues and friends. I think these experiences also need to be heard in a very clear and a very visible way. So I think that's where I think humanity can strive in climate change era and Anthropocene. Humanity can strive for sustainable development.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for basically highlighting that how intergenerational partnership can play an instrumental role in combating climate change. And probably I would say that Rashi ma'am also tried to hint towards the same what was elaborated by Shalini ma'am. We would be happy to have your inputs on this, Rituraj sir, that how intergenerational partnership can play an instrumental role in combating climate change in the futuristic scenario.
Well, I think that's a very good question, and I'd like to just add an example from where I'm working here in Assam with communities affected by human wildlife conflicts. Uh, Needless to say that climate change is one of the factors driving uh, vegetation change, forcing elephant herds from the hills to raid paddy because the grass is gone in many places, right? It's overrun with invasive creepers. Uh, but people in these regions have lived with elephants for a long, long time. But uh, in the in the past decade or so, because uh, the raids, the elephant intrusions have become much more common, and people are, basically very poor. So there is a lot of violent retaliation and a lot of casualties, especially in the uh, past decade. Uh, so one of the things that we do is to go to schools and, along with the village elders, try to bring back those traditions, ancient uh, customs and traditions that people used to have. Uh, there are very unscientific kind of traditions, like where people would offer a part of their crop or harvest to passing elephant herds in the belief that that will prevent them from coming into your village. Uh, so we try to revive this, not just as a these kind of appeasement will not definitely keep the herds away, but then in some cases it did, and it, in a way it revived some of the bond that existed between man and beast. Uh, there may be no scientific explanation for such things, but traditions that were lost in the past decade, something that only the elders knew, we try to revive that by bringing them to, share this in a formal setting, in a school, or um, even in a community setting as well. Similarly, if you look at people who are affected by floods in Assam, the intensity and frequency of floods have increased immensely, uh, and it has caused a lot of tension between generations. The youth are not able to understand that how could the elders have lived in these places for uh, so long, when you keep having 7, 8, 9 waves of floods. But the fact is that there used to be just 1 or 2 waves of floods, and the tribes and the indigenous communities were very adapted. They had developed their resilience to that, and so there is tension. So we try to facilitate a lot of intergenerational learning, so that traditions that were lost are revived. Uh, these things are not quantified. Now, one of the things being talked about at the COP by, especially by indigenous community leaders, was that it's okay to talk about nature-based solutions, but we cannot have one solution for every region. You got to have, uh, you got to identify indigenous knowledge in different parts of the world, among different communities, among each individual different community, and ensure that it is quantified and made available for future generations and for the others, so that you learn from each other and share best practices. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed a very insightful answer. The next question is posed to Shalini ma'am. That how are small countries about to collapse due to climate change?
I think this question is more for Riturajji, but I would like to answer and he may join me in, I think, sharing his Glasgow experiences. I think most of the threat, especially when we talk about smaller countries, with my experience, is more about the Pacific countries or the countries that are smaller island countries, especially Kiribati and all those smaller countries that are facing a sea level rise. And sea level rise, if this is continuous for a very longer time, I'm sure in next couple of, or maybe a decade or so, they will have this risk of submergence. And apart from there, if you talk about the mountain countries also, especially in Hindu Kush Himalayan areas where there is less snow, and less snow also means that they might also affect the kind of agriculture and vegetation they have. So this will again be a greater problem. I'll not say directly collapse, but maybe the situations will be that they will face tremendous impact on these their ecosystems. So these are some of the threatened ecosystems and countries that might be affected because of climate change. And other than that, even India, we should not say that it's only smaller countries. Even the larger countries like India and the coastal ecosystems on West Coast and East Coast are also vulnerable to climate change, be it Mumbai or Odisha or Sundarbans, Visakhapatnam, Tamil Nadu, and then Maldives also in South Asia. So these are the countries that might be facing the brunt of climate change because of the sea level rise and enhanced recession of glaciers that might lead to sea level rise. So this is what I would like to share the experience based on my experience. Maybe if something more Rituraji can share from his experience in Glasgow, I think that will be wonderful.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on, ma'am, about the challenges for small island nations and as well as other countries. One thing that came out of the negotiations was how desperate some of the small islands were. I remember the leader of Costa Rica making a statement that if you do not give us the climate finance, then we are going to mine our forests. We have the coal. So why should I deprive my people from the development they aspire for, right? So I think they are between the hammer and the anvil at this moment. They know that if they start to cut down their forests and start mining the coal, they will definitely add to the problem of global climate change, as well as localize the heating and the impact, including sea level rise. But because of the development aspirations of the people and the likelihood of a change economic model where countries who continue to use the fossil fuels or who are not able to keep the join the propose the carbon mechanism or the carbon credit system, then they might suffer economically as well. So I think here the issue of climate finance becomes even more important for small island nations, for least developed countries, and all the in fact the entire global south who are facing the impacts, having contributed very less of the regions. Thank you.
So now we have the next question for Rashi ma'am. Ma'am, how outdoor work for locals become unbearable due to climate change? Rashi ma'am, are you there?
Yeah, we can move ahead with the next question, Shefali. She might be occupied with something as she just reached her hotel.
Yeah, can be. So let's go for the last question. I would like every perspective on that. So the last question we have here is, are there any natural causes behind climate change occurrence? For this question, let's start with Shalini ma'am. And
thank you for this question. I think, again, a very important question, but at the same time, you need to remember the slides that I have shown. the entire planet has a carbon budget, and if you see the entire evolution and you understand a bit about evolution of Earth, you know that temperatures were not stagnant or fixed for a very longer time. There was a glacial age, there is a temperature rise. So the nature itself regulates itself. There are certain extreme events also. But the kind of climate change that is felt by humanity in last 200 years is unprecedented. The reason is it's more anthropogenic in nature. The kind of carbon emissions we have done in the environment, in the atmosphere of our planet has been more because of anthropogenic reasons, the way we are modifying the shape of our planet. So it's less natural, more man-made interventions that have shaped the entire atmosphere. And if you see even the kind of particulate matter that is in our environment and what Delhi and other larger cities are facing, I'm sure micrometeorological observations also help to that, and they also regulate all these things. But at the same time, it's more the kind of emissions, the kind of pesticides we are using in our farmlands, the excess of fertilizers, the excess dependence on groundwater, the excess dependence on natural resources, and harvesting of wild species for different commercial reasons. So they already have crossed their thresholds. So anything then when it crosses its thresholds becomes alarming. And similar is the situation right now if we talk about climate change. It's more man-made, it's more, and that's how we even call that the era we are living in, the epoch we are living in is more Anthropocene. Because we are shaping up this entire epoch and face of Earth. So it is natural how climates are regulated on Earth, but unfortunately in last 200 years, and if you see the rampant change in the emissions and the carbon dioxide presence in the atmosphere, it has been even faster from 1990 onwards in last 30 years than it was in last 200 years. So this is again the kind of change that we have brought in. So it's less natural and more alarming and more man-made. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to just add that it is the nature of the climate to change, like just as Madam said. So it's a very natural phenomenon. It has happened all the time in the history of the Earth, but the pace at which it is happening now, that is the problem here. And because it is anthropogenic, and it is too fast for species to evolve. It is too, the changes are happening at such a rapid pace, which has never had happened before. And I think one more point is that probably because of how fast it is happening, some things, some natural tipping points are also reached, especially in the Arctic, where some scientists have talked about regime shift a couple of years back in one of the Arctic Council reports. So these regime shifts in nature itself are happening because of the cataclysmic effects of climate change. So you could, I think, safely say that we are changing the very nature of things, and that is not a good thing at all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for an insightful answer. Thank you for all the panelists for answering the questions. This brings us to the end of this brainstorming session. We would now invite our research and ideation head, Ms. Arshpreet, to share a vote of thanks.
An event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels of planning started rolling weeks ago. We are fortunate enough to be backed by Neha ma'am and a wonderful team of proactive members who were well versed with their jobs. Really, you are truly an epitome of dedication and mentorship. We sincerely appreciate your insights and guidance you have provided in this short span of time.
Now, I would like to thank every participant who has made it to this panel discussion today. Participants are now requested to fill in the feedback form linked in the chat box. Team Ecosperity is highly obliged to all the attendees and the panelists for being with us today. It has been a great pleasure. Thank you and have a great day ahead.
Well, thanks again from my side. Thanks to Ecosperity. Thanks to Shalini ma'am. Thanks to Rituraj sir. Thanks to Rashi ma'am. And many thanks to Dharam sir for your presence over here. And for the rescue, Shalini ma'am, I am here at the college. You'll be happy to know that the students of management, commerce, and economics, they are well versed with planktons, zooplanktons, phytoplanktons, web of life. Thankfully, I'm there for the rescue, so you need not worry. The concepts laid by you were making sense to them. Thank you, ma'am.
Neha, it really makes me proud of you that to all the commerce and economic students, you have made their foundation even more stronger than what is expected from them. I really feel proud of students and of you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for the support. Kindly fill in the feedback form. And thank you, Team Ecosperity, for again, conducting a successful session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.